So how does something like that happen? How does a huge subcontinent-wide rebellion against a common enemy in just 90 years turn into the creation of two rival nations? Well, today we're going to dig into the historical sources to understand the key moments that led to one of the biggest, most consequential partitions of the 20th century.
All right, let's get right to it. Think about it. In 1857, you've got this united front against the British. By 1947, that unity is just gone, shattered so completely that the only solutions seem to be to split the country in two. So, what on earth happened in that gap? That's the core question we're exploring today.
So our story, it doesn't actually start in some stuffy parliamentary debate or at a negotiating table. It starts on the battlefield. And the failure of this massive shared rebellion would change the entire course of the independence movement. Now, the really key thing to understand about this rebellion is that it was a joint effort. And, the sources really stress this point. Hindus and Muslims were fighting side by side. But for all that unity, it failed. And why? Well, a big part of it was a lack of central planning. While the British had this game-changing piece of tech, the telegraph, it gave them a huge advantage in communication and logistics. And that defeat, wow, it was a huge turning point. It forced this really profound shift in thinking. It was this tough realization that trying to win with brute force just wasn't going to cut it. So the thinking shifted completely. The new strategy was, okay, let's figure out what makes them so powerful, their political systems, their education, and then let's beat them at their own game. Okay, so they're moving into the political arena. But here's the thing. The path that was supposed to bring everyone together, well, it started to fork. First up, in 1885, you get the Indian National Congress, and its goal, on paper, was to represent all Indians. But fast forward about 20 years to 1906, and the All India Muslim League is formed. And this wasn't just another political party. It was created for a very specific reason, a growing sense that the Muslim community's unique political rights and interests just weren't being heard within the Congress. And one of the core ideas that really came to define the Muslim League was this concept of separate electorates. Basically, it was a system designed to guarantee their voice. It meant Muslim voters would only vote for Muslim candidates. The whole idea was to make sure they'd have representation in government, no matter what the wider majority wanted. And this became a huge point of debate.
But, for a brief shining moment, it looked like they could actually make it work. In 1916, at Lucknow, the Congress actually agreed to the idea of separate electorates. This was a huge deal, a real high point of cooperation. And Muhammad Ali Jinnah, who was key to making it happen, was even hailed as the ambassador of Hindu-Muslim unity.
But then, a world war breaks out. And what happened thousands of miles away would end up driving a massive wedge right through that fragile unity back in India. So, World War I ends. The Ottoman Empire in Turkey is defeated. And you might be asking, okay, so what? What does that have to do with India? Well, it mattered a lot, because the Ottoman Sultan was also the caliph, the spiritual head for many Sunni Muslims. And with him defeated, a huge fear swept through Indian Muslims that the British would just abolish the whole institution. This sparked a massive protest called the Khilafat movement. And right here, you see this huge split in strategy, a real fork in the road. On one side, you had Mahatma Gandhi, who saw this as a golden opportunity to unite Hindus and Muslims. So he put the full power of the Congress behind it, launching this massive nationwide non-cooperation movement. But on the other side, you had Jinnah, and he was really worried. He warned that mixing religion and politics like this was a dangerous game, and he actually resigned from Congress because of it. This movement got massive. I mean, huge momentum. But then, it all just stopped. It came to a screeching halt. What happened was, in a village called Chari Chara, some protesters got violent and killed several policemen. For Gandhi, a man who believed so strongly in non-violence, that was a line that couldn't be crossed. He called the entire movement off. And according to the source, this just left the Khilafat cause hanging. And it really hurt the Muslim League, which had bet everything on this movement. So, with the big street protests now over, the fight snaps right back to the negotiating table, to constitutional politics. And this is where those divisions just became crystal clear. Yeah, this really shows you the stalemate they were in. You had the Nehru Report, which Congress supported, and it basically said, let's get rid of separate electorates and have one system for everyone. But in direct response, Jinnah came out with his 14 points. And he didn't just disagree, he doubled down. saying that things like separate electorates and other protections for minorities were absolutely non-negotiable. I mean, they were on completely different pages.
All right, so this gridlock gets put to the test with the 1937 provincial elections. And the results? Whoa, it was a massive victory for Congress. But for the Muslim League, a total disaster. Just look at those numbers. They won only a tiny fraction of the seats that were set aside for Muslims. This was a huge blow to their claim of being the one voice for the community. But what happened after the election was absolutely pivotal. So Congress is in power in several provinces for about 2 years, and they bring in these new policies, things like making a particular song mandatory in schools and promoting the Hindi language. For the Muslim League and its supporters, this felt like a direct attack on their culture and identity. The source here uses some really strong words, calling it a nightmarish rule that sparked genuine fear about what the future would look like for them as a minority. And that experience, that raw fear of being a permanent minority with no real power, well, it led to the most radical political shift we've seen yet.
And here it is. This is what it all led to. The Lahore Resolution on March 23, 1940. This is the moment the game completely changes. The demand wasn't about safeguards anymore. It wasn't about getting more seats within India. The demand was now for a whole separate country, Pakistan.
And this quote from Gandhi just perfectly captures the massive gap in thinking between the two sides. He just couldn't accept the two nations theory, the idea that Hindus and Muslims were two separate nations. He argued, hey, most Muslims in India converted. That doesn't make them a different nation. But from the Muslim League's perspective, the last few years had proven the exact opposite. They felt their distinct identities simply could not survive in a united Hindu-majority India. So in the final years, there were these last-ditch attempts to hold everything together. The British sent the Cripps mission. It failed. Gandhi and Jinnah had face-to-face talks. They failed. The Viceroy proposed the Weevil Plan. And it failed too. One after another, every attempt to find a middle ground just fell apart. And then came the election that settled it. In the 1945-46 elections, the Muslim League had basically one thing on their platform: Pakistan. And the result? Just look at this number. 100%. They won every single Muslim seat in the Central Assembly. That was it. The demand now had a clear, overwhelming mandate from the voters. The political debate was essentially over. So the political battle was won. That incredible 90-year journey from a united rebellion to this deep division had reached its destination. But as the British packed their bags, accepting the idea of partition didn't end the struggle. In many ways, it was the beginning of a whole new, much more violent one. It raised all these terrifying new questions about borders, about people being uprooted, and it left a legacy that continues to shape that part of the world to this very day.